Hello, fellow griever. This is the Leftover Pieces Suicide Loss Conversations podcast, and I am Melissa, your host. This week, you have found yourself with me for one of my shorter, solo Down the Rabbit Hole episodes. Here, I take you with me on a journey of sorts, through thoughts in my own griefy mind. Some days, I may tackle topics as if I am in Alice's shoes, slaying the Jabberwocky. And on others, I may end up in my own pool of tears. Or I may just go a bit sideways and paint the proverbial roses red. But I always promise an adventure. So let's dive down the rabbit hole and see just what sorts of madness we might discover together. I am glad you have joined me, because while I do know how lonely this grief is, I also believe we needn't be alone. Welcome. Before we start this episode today, I want to take just a quick minute to share something very exciting with you. I am going to be hosting a transformational healing retreat this summer. Yes, just months from now. This retreat is curated specifically for moms who have lost their child to suicide. Do you or a mom you know need to get away? Clear your head, care for your heart, partake in transformational healing modalities, connect with other moms, and all the while, feel the tropical sun on your face. I would encourage you to go to my website now, click on the very top teal bar, or scroll midway down to my page and click there to learn all about why Casa Alterna Vida is a house of transformation, why I chose to host my retreat there, and why you should consider joining us. There are limited spaces, so go take a look today. It would be my honor to hold space for you here in sunny Puerto Rico, because while this journey is lonely, you do not have to be alone. Hello, fellow grievers, and welcome to today's Rabbit Hole episode. We are in Season 5. This is Episode 9, and it is also the third part to a 3-part series I've been doing called Mindset, Motivation, and Monkeys. If you have not listened to parts 1 or 2, it's not necessary, but it's recommended because the order of these is, the same order that you would need to implement them in your own life. So parts 1 and 2 would be episodes. If this is 9, they would be episodes, I believe, 7, maybe 6 and 7, maybe 5 and 7. Anyway, they would be labeled the same way as this one. In mindsets, we talked about what a mindset is, right? It's our way of thinking. It's our opinions. It involves internal choices that we make. So in other words, just setting our mind on something. In motivation, we talked about the internal state that propels us to engage in goal-directed behavior, if you will. So at the end of the day, that's what this 3-part series is about. Goals, growth, and getting us towards healing, right? And towards finding new joy and rebuilding ourselves, right? That's what this is. These are just steps. They're not definitive steps to be all end all, but they are definitely steps to put into place as part of working towards your healing. So now we move on to part 3 of the series, which I have titled Monkeys.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too.
Okay, perhaps not exactly those kind of monkeys, but moreover the circus kind. However, that soundbite seemed more fun than playing circus music. So, have you ever heard the phrase, not my monkeys, not my circus? Well, most of us have, and it really is about boundaries. There's the word for today, and it was so much more interesting to call it monkeys than boundaries because mindset, motivation, and boundaries doesn't sound that exciting for a series. So, monkeys. And I know oftentimes when I feel like I need to say no or bow out of something, I say, not my monkeys, not my circus. And so I thought, why not here? Why not talk about that concept in relationship to how hard it is to draw boundaries in grief? There's a myth that's out there in our society, in our culture, that boundaries are actually something put in place to stop us from doing something, when in reality, especially from an emotional standpoint, they actually are there to propel and protect us. And those are the boundaries I want to talk about today as part of the mindset, motivation, and monkeys or boundaries discussion that we're having. The day that our loved one died, everything changed. And that changed everything, including us. Our whole life is being rebuilt, including our values in many ways, our thoughts, and definitely, if you're like me, our priorities, among other things. And yes, like everything after traumatic loss, this also is a process. So I can't even begin to promise that there's any sort of quick in this, but I can promise with choices and bravery and support that you can find joy in a full life. Again, yes, a different life and a different joy than we had imagined, but a life and joy nonetheless. So now what? Now what do we do? What am I suggesting you do to start putting boundaries into place? Because learning how to do that is multifaceted. So the first thing I would consider you include, if you are not already doing it, is a journal. And possibly even set aside a journal that's just for goals and rebuilding. If it's many people that I know, and I've even heard it recommended by therapists before, that having more than one type of journal can be really therapeutic. Some people have journals that are just for their angry thoughts. They sometimes even take those thoughts, that journal, and after they're done with it, they may bury it, they may rip it up, they may burn the pages individually, they may just keep it and put it away. But sometimes they have gratitude journals. There's dream journals. So we have all sorts of journals. But I think that when you're trying to rebuild your life, when you're trying to get your mindset right, find your motivation, and set your boundaries, that journaling about these things could be really helpful. And I would recommend including your therapist or your support system or even support community if you are lucky enough to be in a community of fellow grievers, like many of the moms are in my community. It's also a good place to have that accountability as well. So if you were to start journaling or just even write these down as an exercise, I would suggest that you put a few goals out there. Start with your goal word for the year, but set a few goals. Get your correct mindset about it, right? Define your motivation, which would be your why. Why do you want to accomplish this particular goal or set of goals? And then begin by recognizing the monkeys, the places that you need to draw boundaries, like actually name them. Are they people? Is it your own, work? Is it something like that? Name the boundaries and the places or people that you need to set boundaries with. And after you've listed them out, the next challenge I would have for you is to go through them one by one and ask, are these my monkeys? Do they belong in my circus or do they belong in someone else's? So in essence, what I'm asking you to determine with each of these is whether it's a you problem or a somebody or something else problem. And I know that this is complicated. I know that it may seem easier said than done, which is the way it is with a lot of things that we have to take on, right? But this is a step in that direction. It helps us start to understand that why it's important to limit what we're able to accept from others. So now I want to kind of break down the parts of setting boundaries, which would be how to recognize them, how to set them or define them, which is usually a communication piece, and then enforcing them, which can be usually communication, but sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's nonverbal, but the enforcing them piece. And sometimes we go back and forth between these a little bit when we're working on setting them. So in recognizing them, how to recognize our boundaries. I will tell you that from a traumatic grief standpoint, guilt is usually the emotion at the center of recognizing these. If a situation or a person makes you feel guilty, there's probably a boundary that needs to be set there. Now, yes, we have to recognize, am I taking on guilt that isn't intended? Because in that case, we need to work on our personal boundaries, right? Within our own emotional self and guilt and shame and blame, the shame and blame game. But if it's interaction with that person in particular and something they're doing, there probably is a boundary that needs to be set on one side or the other, or sometimes both. So this isn't meant to keep all people out. It's meant to protect and create a respect, which would actually bring us closer to people. Sometimes, unfortunately, it does show us that those people do not hold the same place in our life that maybe they did before, and that can be for better or for worse. Have you ever heard the phrase, good fences make good neighbors? Or have you heard the airlines in their speech say, put on your own oxygen mask first because you can't help others if you are in distress? So this is that same thought process, right? It's about building good fences. It's about having good boundaries so that you can actually have better relationships, not worse. So, do you often find yourself relying on others to make up your own mind? That's something that I think is important in helping us ask ourselves about our personal boundaries and where we are with our comfort level in setting them. So next, we'll go to the second part, which is how to define or set your boundaries. So some of the things you have to do here are believe your own feelings, right? Because it's your choice what your boundaries are. It's your choice to only keep your own monkeys in your own circus and not bring others into it. You have to be able to alleviate codependency in your life, or at least in these interpersonal relationships that are a part of your immediate circle. If you are easily offended, one of the things that we have to work on is that, right? That's one of the pieces that I know I've had to work on before, especially in early grief, because there were a lot of things that I found offensive that when I really peeled them back, I really just needed to educate myself. I needed to interact more in the topic of suicide loss and death and grief. And once I did that, I found that I wasn't necessarily as easily offended. It was something I had to work on first before I could clearly see when it was other people being offensive, or was it just me being too highly sensitive? And I know, again, these things are complicated. Sometimes you might have to listen to this again or pause and go back or take notes because there's a lot here. So you also have to ask yourself what or who has upset you. And that can be very simple, and it can also be complicated. So the what and or the who that has upset you. And then find your power, find your assertiveness. I'm not suggesting aggressiveness. I'm simply suggesting confident assertiveness. And it isn't about just telling someone no. Sometimes it's more about telling them what your yes is. I often think that this is kind of like how it is when we parent well, to not just catch our kid doing bad things. We want to catch them doing good things so that they do more of those things and less of the bad things. It's the same kind of thing when we're setting boundaries. We don't always want to say no to somebody, but we want to be able to create a yes situation. So an example would be, instead of saying, no, I don't want to come to your Christmas party, you can say, since losing, I'm going to use my example, since losing my son Alex, I have found large social gatherings really difficult. So I'm going to pass, but I would love to say yes the next time you're having a small, intimate gathering. I might be up to that. So there's ways to frame things that aren't people just hearing you say no when you're setting your boundaries. It's actually educating them on what you need. It's actually painting the fence, if you will. It's actually enforcing something and making it in a way that goes further than just a no would. And I hope that makes sense. So the next thing you have to do is enforce your boundaries, because sometimes a one and done doesn't work. Sometimes, especially with people in our inner circle, sometimes especially with family, reminders are required, right? So one of the things I like to do when I'm working on a boundary setting is sometimes I have to write out what it is I'm going to say to the person that I love to try to set this boundary. And then in a safe space, I practice it, whether that's myself in the mirror, whether that's with another trusted person, or say another grieving mom. I say, can I bounce this off of you? This is the boundary I'm trying to set. And how is this coming across? So that if I'm coming across too harsh or something, because I can do that sometimes, I can then tone it down or retool it to make sure it's fitting in nice, safe construct that can be received well. You have to be assertive, which again, I said, be careful not to be aggressive. You have to be appreciative, and you have to be consistent when enforcing these boundaries. And these things can be really hard, right? For us normally, but for those of us that are grieving, this feels like a really heavy lift. But I promise you it's worth it. Our peace of mind, just our own peace, is worth it. So there's a self-esteem tie into this that I kind of alluded to earlier. But because there is, this is part of what makes it extra hard for us as a suicide loss or a trauma survivor, if you will, because there's so much guilt and unknown and questions surrounding suicide loss that it takes such a big hit on our self-esteem. And because it takes some self-esteem to be confident and assertive, you'll see that there's some double things that have to be going on here, or maybe some prerequisites to even being able to do some of this, to set good boundaries. But again, food for thought, because if the self-esteem path is one you need to go down, I had to go down it for a couple of years to rebuild my self-esteem. Then I'm not saying you can't be working on boundaries at the same time, but know that it is part of it, that you're not going to probably be as good at setting them or enforcing them until you have worked on some of the other pieces as well. And one of the other things we have to do, which is really, really hard, is to stop worrying about being liked or being popular for our decisions, right? We have this respect distortion that goes on in our mind, and that's a tough one. And in cultivating mutual respect, we have to be able to put things out to people in a way that they can receive. So here's a couple of quick examples that came to mind. I know that before I lost Alex, I was often in charge of, groups and things at my kids' school. I often was the person who would arrange things or host meetings. It was just kind of my role. And so this is something I could have found myself in this situation where maybe, say, my co-chair or somebody that was in a leadership role or working closely with me, this would be a discussion I could have had with them. Because quite often those people give you your quote unquote bereavement time, and then they expect that you're just going to pick back up with leading meetings. There's a distortion sometimes that they believe that's actually good for you to do. And depending on where you're at in your grief journey, that could be the farthest thing from the truth. So if you're at the place that you need to step back from some of the things, here's an example of how that conversation could go. I would have said something like, I know that before Alex died, I was always taking the lead and even hosting a lot of our meetings. But because this is unbelievably hard to be living without my son here, I have found this to be more than I can take on right now. I'm sure you understand, and I would appreciate it if you could help me find someone else to do this for the foreseeable future. And tell them again that you appreciate them taking this off of your plate, that you couldn't do this without them. Again, the appreciative part, express your gratitude and then turn it back on them to enforce. Now, this is where, yes, you could have to go back into, reinforcing the boundary at some point. If they're pushing back, let them know you're not sure whether you'll ever step back into that role, but that you really valued your time doing that and that you either have to step back completely for now, or if you really just wanted to become an attendee or something, you could say, I will enjoy still attending when I'm able and supporting in any way I can, but I feel like my leadership role at this point has come to an end, just a way of, and then of course, letting them know how much you appreciate their assistance in this. Again, an example may not exactly apply, but it gives you an idea of some of the verbiage you could use. Another example might be something more like if it's a friend or family member that you maybe used to talk to every day, and they're still expecting that same kind of communication, and you just can't. You're tired, you're exhausted. Let's say the conversation's something that, maybe they want to just talk about things that seem pointless to you. I mean, again, for those of you listening that are grievers, which I'm guessing are most of you, we oftentimes feel irritated and things at stuff that we normally wouldn't, just because of how mundane some of it now seems, how unimportant things that used to seem important are. And so oftentimes that'll bleed into our personal relationships, right? And we won't want to have those same daily conversations or pointless chats that maybe we once did. And so this would be some way to maybe delicately try to frame something like that. I know before Alex died, we were talking every day on the phone. And I know that you're sensing that I'm pulling away from that. And I need you to know how much I love you and how much I appreciate you allowing that to change. I need to have more time to myself right now. This is only about me and not about you. And I hope that you will continue to support me as our friendship or relationship, however you want to frame that, continues to develop. And I don't know what that means for the future. I don't know if we'll ever go back to talking like we used to, because I'm still trying to figure out who I am. But having your support and you understanding this means the world to me. And I really appreciate that. It kind of puts people in that position to where they're saying, of course, no problem. And you've set that boundary. You've built this beautiful fence for them to, knock on the gate of, instead of just barge into your yard, if that makes sense. So again, I know somewhat generic examples, but I wanted to be able to give you some framework for what I was talking about. And as I conclude this series, I want to end it by telling you why I think this concept of mindset, motivation, and monkeys is so vital to the healing part of this journey we're on. I think it because in order to live our life alongside this grief, to learn to rebuild and learn to live again, we have to choose to embark on a healing journey. And yeah, I pause there because so much of what we do after loss is a choice. So we have to choose to embark on a healing journey. And although there is absolutely no doubt that this is beyond hard and extremely lonely, I want to remind you that we don't have to do it alone. And I see evidence of the power of that in the community that I lead every day. So if you don't have that community of support, I do think that's an important part of this. I hope that you will see what we've talked about in this 3-part series as building blocks, or maybe moreover, rebuilding blocks along with the support that you have in your life, will help you get moving in that direction. And until next week, talk soon. So we'll conclude here for today, but I just wanted to say a few things before you go. If you're new to the podcast and have not listened to the very first episode called Intro Episodes Start Here, all the way back at the beginning of Season 1, I would encourage you to do so that you know what to expect from the leftover pieces, because I do have several different styles of episodes that I record, and we do release weekly, almost all of the time. So I hope that you will come back often to join us in this community of suicide loss survivors. If you have not already, also, I would encourage you to check out theleftoverpieces.com, where you can find and have access to all of the things that I currently offer. Some of those things are online Zoom support groups, links to my books, educational opportunities that I'm adding all the time, as well as different downloadables and resources for all suicide loss survivors. And if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, or you'd just like to connect with me for any other reason, you can do it through the website as well. So until next time, I just want to remind you that I know how lonely this grief is, but you don't have to be alone. Talk soon.